The lamp had burned down to almost nothing, and I remember watching the last of the flame because I could not make myself look at the man sitting across the room. My wedding dress was folded over the back of a chair. Below us, I could hear the last of the dishes being carried out, my father's voice low and satisfied, the scrape of benches being stacked against the wall. And there, on the edge of a bed I had never slept in, sat a man with gray, already coming into his beard. He was old enough to be my father's brother. In truth, he had been born the same year as my father, and I was 15. Before I tell you what he said to me that night, and before I tell you the thing I did not understand until I was 71 years old, let me introduce myself. My name is Anna. I grew up Old Order Amish in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, in a time most of you would think belongs to another world entirely. I am 79 now. I left when I was an old woman already, which almost no one does, and this channel, Hannah the Amish Girl, is where I finally say the things I carried in silence for more than 60 years. If you want to hear the truths we were never allowed to speak, subscribe and tap the like button, and tell me in the comments where you are listening from. I read every one, even now with these old eyes. I want you to understand something before I go on. When I was a girl, marriages were not always made by the young people themselves. That is the picture people have today. 2 teenagers riding home in a buggy, courting quietly. And that did happen. But in my district, in my time, there was another kind of arrangement, older and quieter, and no one spoke of it plainly. A father could give his daughter to a man, not with chains, not with shouting. It was done with a nod at the right moment, a word after church, a visit arranged, a wedding announced before the girl herself had understood that anything had been decided. That is what happened to me. His name was Amos. He was 40 years old the autumn we were married. He had buried 1 wife already. He had a farm free of debt, 160 acres, good bottomland along the creek, and he had no children living. 2 had died small. I knew none of this the day my father called me in from the garden, sat me down at the kitchen table, and told me that Amos had spoken to him, and that it was a good thing, and that I should be grateful. I was 15 years old. I had thought I would go to the singings a few more years. I had a boy in mind already, though I had never said his name aloud to a living soul. His name did not matter after that afternoon. My father had decided. Here is what people outside our world do not understand about obedience. It is not that you are forced. No one dragged me to that wedding. It is that from the time you can walk, you are taught that your own wanting is the most dangerous thing inside you. Hochmut, we called it, pride. To want something for yourself, to say, I would rather not, to lift your own small will against your father's, against the church, against the Ordnung that governed every hour of every day. That was the beginning of every sin. So when my father said it was a good thing, my mouth said yes. My heart was screaming, but I had been trained my whole life not to hear it, and I did not. We were married in November, after the harvest, on a Thursday, the way weddings were done then. I woke at 4 in the morning to help with the cooking. By noon, there were near 300 people in my parents' house and barn. The bishop preached for 2 hours about the wife who submits, about the household built on the fear of God, about Sarah who called Abraham Lord. I sat on a hard bench in a new blue dress my mother had sewn, and I looked at Amos across the room, this graying man I had spoken to perhaps 4 times in my life, and I thought, I do not know this man at all, and tonight I will belong to him. I want to be honest with you about that night, because for 60 years I was not honest with anyone, not even myself. I was afraid, not the ordinary fear of a young bride, a deeper thing. No one had told me anything, nothing. My mother had not spoken 1 word to me about what marriage would ask of my body. That silence was called modesty. It was called Protecting My Innocence. What it truly did was send a 15-year-old girl into a room with a man of 40, knowing nothing at all, with no words for what was happening, no way to say what hurt, no understanding that she was even allowed to feel anything about it one way or the other. Amos was not a cruel man. I want to say that plainly, because the story is not the story you may be expecting. He did not raise his hand to me. Not that night, not ever. When I flinched, he grew still. When I could not stop my tears, he did not shout. He said in the dark, "You will get used to it." And the terrible thing, the thing I have turned over in my mind 10,000 times since, is that I did. That is what they meant by it. Not love, not even kindness exactly. Getting used to it. A girl teaching her own body to stop objecting. The years came, the way years do on a farm. I learned his ways. I learned when he wanted silence and when he wanted the sound of me moving about the kitchen. I bore him children, 7 of them, 5 who lived. I buried 2, a boy of 3 days and a girl of 2 years, and I laid them in the ground in the plain white way we did. No headstone but a small marker. And I told myself it was God's will, because that was the only sentence I had ever been given for grief. I baked for the frolics. I quilted with the women. I aged. My hands grew hard, and then they grew thin. Amos grew old before me, as men who are older do, and I nursed him at the end, the way a wife does. And when he died, I was 68 years old, and I had been his wife for 53 years. And I thought that was the whole of it. A hard marriage, an obedient life, a story like 100 other women's stories in those valleys. I thought I understood what had happened to me. I thought my father had simply wanted a good match, a farm without debt, a settled man. I did not learn the truth until 3 years after Amos was in the ground. What happened over the next 11 Sundays, I cannot carry it in 20 minutes. There are things this recording cannot hold. The names, the counting, the drawer, the dress I kept for 27 years. 3 years ago, I wrote it all down. The book is called The Sundays. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. It was my Aunt Fanny who told me, and she told me only because she was dying and could not carry it into the ground with her. She was my father's younger sister, near 90 by then, her mind sharp as a needle even as her body failed. I sat with her in her last weeks, the way you do, and one afternoon, with the light going gold across her quilt, she took my hand and she said, "Anna, there is a thing you should have been told long ago. It is not right that you go on not knowing." I want you to understand what I felt when she began to speak, because it is the reason I am sitting here, an old woman, telling strangers what I never told my own children. What she told me was this. My father had owed Amos money, a great deal of it. There had been a bad year, then a worse one, a barn that burned and was not insured because insurance was worldly, a debt that grew and grew the way debts do, and Amos, who had the good bottom land and the farm free of debt, had held that paper over my father, and there had been an arrangement. Not written, never written, nothing among us was ever written, but an understanding between 2 men at a kitchen table. The debt would be forgiven, and in return my father would give. He gave me. I was the payment. I was 15 years old, and I was the interest on a debt I did not know existed, handed across a table between 2 men, while I pulled carrots in the garden, thinking about a boy whose name I would never say. I did not weep when Fanny told me. That is the strange thing. I had wept my whole life, quietly, into aprons and pillows and the necks of my babies. But when she told me this, I went very still, the way the barn goes still before a storm. Because all at once 60 years of my life rearranged themselves in front of me. Every time my father had looked at me across a room, and something had passed over his face that I had taken for love, or for the ordinary weariness of a farming man, and had never once understood. It was not love. It was the look of a man who has sold something he should not have sold, and must see the price of it walk past him at every family supper for the rest of his days. I understood my father then, at 71, in a way I never had when he was living. I do not forgive it. I want to be careful when I say that, because I know some of you are waiting for the part where the old woman says she forgave everyone and found peace. I have not found that particular peace, and I will not lie to you to make this easier to listen to. But I understood him. He was a man raised exactly as I was raised, taught that a daughter is a thing a household possesses, taught that debt is shame, and shame must be answered, taught that a girl's own wanting counts for less than nothing against the survival of the family and the good name of the church. He did what his whole world had shaped him to do. That does not make it right. It makes it a tragedy, instead of only a cruelty, and I have had 8 years now to learn the difference. Here is the thing I most want to say, and I have thought a long time about how to say it. The silence was not an accident. I used to believe that no one told me things because they were shy, because such matters were private, because that was simply how we were. But an old woman has time to think, and I have come to believe something harder. The silence was the whole machine. If a girl does not know she is being sold, she cannot refuse. If she has no words for what is being done to her body, she cannot say it is wrong. If she is taught that her own will is the greatest sin, then she will hand that will over herself, with her own 2 hands, and call it faith. They did not need to force me. They only needed to make sure I never knew there was anything to refuse. My aunt's dying words were not really a confession of one man's debt. They were a window thrown open on the whole design of it. I left the church when I was 73. People ask me how a woman leaves after a whole life inside, after children and grandchildren, and every soul she knows on the other side of that fence. The shunning came, of course. My children could not sit at a table with me, could not take food from my hand. Some of my grandchildren I have not seen since. I will not pretend that cost was small. It is the largest thing I have ever paid, larger than the wedding, larger than the 53 years. But I could not sit one more Sunday on those benches, hearing about the wife who submits, knowing what I now knew about how one such submission had been arranged. I had to walk out into the world an old woman and learn it from the beginning, like a child. I want to tell you what I found out there, because it is not all grief. In the world, I met a woman at a library, a plain, kind woman, who was paid to help old people learn to read the modern way, and she gave me words I had never had. She taught me the word consent. She taught me the word coercion. She taught me that a child of 15 cannot truly agree to a marriage, no matter whose nod arranged it, and that this is not my private shame, but something the wider world has a name for and a wrongness for. I sat in that library, 74 years old, and I cried the way I had not cried when Fanny told me, because I finally had the words for a thing I had carried since I was a girl in a garden. I do not tell you this for your pity. I have had a long life, and much of it was good in the ordinary ways. The smell of bread, the weight of a sleeping child, the sound of rain on a barn roof, the women singing slow in the old tongue. I will not let anyone take those from me, and I will not let the wrong I have told you swallow the whole of my years. 2 things can be true. My life was stolen from me at a kitchen table when I was 15, and my life was also mine, and full, and lived. I hold both. An old woman learns to hold both, or she does not survive. If you were ever handed to someone, if your own wanting was ever called a sin, so that someone else could take what they wanted from you, if you spent years thinking a thing was your fault and only understood the truth of it when you were far too old to get those years back, I see you. It is not too late to know the truth of your own life, even at 79, especially at 79. The knowing itself is worth something. I promise you that. The Sundays. What 20 minutes cannot hold. The link is in the description and the pinned comment. The morning is yours, if you decide it is.